plus our variable costs. All right, so you might like to do a little wee table in a Word document, right? That's along those sort of lines, or you might like to do it in Google Sheets, or you might like to do it pen and paper, right? That's sort of an idea, okay? And we are going to jump back into Nearpod soon, don't panic, all right? So your total costs are going to be your fixed costs plus your variable costs are going to equal your total costs, okay? We also had other costs. We talked about your average of your total costs. And the average of your total costs was going to equal your total costs divided by your quantity that you produce. You could have the average of your fixed costs, and that would be the total fixed costs divided by quantity that you produce. Might be that you have the average of your variable costs, which would then be equal to the total of your variable costs, again divided by the quantity. Yeah? So maybe we can add a quantity column, perhaps. Yeah. And I'm going to put some quantities in. 1, 2, 3, make it relatively straightforward. Go to 5. And then we're going to do maths and see what happens. Hopefully this will work. Yeah. It's been a while since I've written on a board. Yeah. Okay. Now, fixed costs. Now we said that our fixed costs were going to be the same regardless of the level of output. Okay? They don't change based on the level of output. They could change if we change the old structure of our business, you know, building new factories, etc. But essentially, our fixed costs don't change, regardless of the level of output.
Wait, Mr. David?
Yeah?
Could you move your camera to the right a bit? Your right. Yeah, just a bit. Yeah, okay.
Like that? Better?
A bit to the left.
A bit to the left.
Enough, yeah. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay. So fixed costs, therefore, let's start with fixed costs. I'm going to put them at 100. Now, because they're fixed, they don't change. 100 is a nice round number. So they're going to end up in there. Just like that. Ta-da! Fixed. They don't change regardless of the level of output. So the level of output has changed. Fixed costs, they haven't changed. They're fixed. Your variable costs are going to change, because remember, one of the variable costs is your wages. One of the variable costs is the resource cost that you've got, right? So because you're producing more, you need more resources and you need more labor. So that's going to cost you more. So it might be that your fixed costs start out at 10. Sorry, variable costs, what I'm talking about. Variable costs start out at 10, but then they perhaps go to 20 and then to 30, then to 40, and then to 50. Okay, and I'm making it I'm trying to make it as straightforward as I can, so the numbers are going to be, you know, relatively straightforward to manipulate and calculate with. If you're wanting to work out the total of your costs, then you need to add the fixed cost plus the variable costs. So for quantity of 1, we would have 110 at those two. Quantity of 2, 120, quantity of 3, 130, quantity of 4, 40, and 150 for a quantity of 5. So that's how we've added those up. And you see what's happened. Your total costs have been increasing, right, as your output rises. The reason why they're increasing is because of your variable costs, which are also increasing. Variable costs are increasing based on the idea that there's more resources needing to be used as you produce more goods and services. The further calculations here, right, we're going to take the formulas, information that we've got here, and we're going to divide them by the quantity, these numbers here, right? So the average of your total costs, so there was your total costs, and then we need to divide them by the quantity. So 110 divided by 1 is 110. Right? 120 divided by 2 is 60. Hey, my maths is doing all right for a Monday morning. What do we got here? 130 divided by 3. May have spoken too soon. 130 divided by 3.
43.33 recurring.
Right, 43 and a bit. Okay. Yes, the quantity is 1 to 5. Then you've got 140, and that's going to be divided by 4. So what does that equal?
35.
Yes.
Right. And then what else have we got here? 150 divided by 5.
That's 30.
Sorry, how much?
30.
30. Well done, team. So that's the average of your total costs. And what you can do is you can see what's happening. So initially, your average costs have fallen. So they've fallen there, they've fallen there, they've fallen there, and they've fallen there. Now, if we were to keep going, there's the chance that they might actually rise again. Yeah? If we have a look here at your fixed costs, they were 100 all the way down. Then we need to divide those by the quantities. So 100 divided by 1 is 100. what did I say? 100? 100 over 2. 100 divided by 3. 100 divided by 4. And 100 divided by 5. And then you can again look and see what's happening to the average of your fixed costs. And as we saw, as we discussed, they're actually decreasing and getting smaller and 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 smaller. So they're going to get really small because that is the average of your fixed costs. So that amount is being spread over a large number of inputs. So the more output, the more output you produce, that fixed cost is spread over greater and greater quantity. So the number of average of that is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller over time. And this one here is the average of your variable costs. So you're going to take these ones and divide them by the quantity. So 10 over 1. We've got 22. 30 divided by 3. 40 divided by 4. Goodness me. 50 divided by 5. So your average variable costs are the same, right? Because that's how it works out. Yeah. Now, that's the maths there. And realistically, you don't need to do much more than that with regards to your understanding of business economics. There's a little bit that we have to do with regards to revenues and profits, which we're going to be coming to. Okay? But on the calculation of costs, that's really, realistically, the sum total of the maths that you're going to need. The understandings, yeah, there's a little bit to the understandings, like when we saw that you're spreading your average fixed costs over a larger and larger number of quantities, so therefore it's getting smaller and smaller. Okay, so there's understanding that can happen. And that idea that you're adding your variable costs, and your variable costs are increasing based on the quantities because it's more resources and more labor and all of that needed to be added as you start producing more. So therefore those variable costs should be increasing. Yeah? And understanding all of that and how you come up with those numbers is a big step, right? And as I said to you, whenever it was the other week, you don't get a formula sheet. So it's just going to be expected that you will remember those individual formulas and how to figure them out. Now, you're more likely to be asked a question in multiple choice, which means that the answer tends to be there, but it will be application based. So you will still potentially have to do a calculation, yeah, but the answer at least will be there. So it might be, for example, that they leave completely out the average fixed cost for 3 units of quantity, yeah? And you have to work out what that number is, okay? And therefore, there might be several different numbers and you have to figure them out. It might be that it is there, but you have to explain why it is doing that, why it is that the numbers are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. You know? And the answer will be there, but you know. The next type will be when we're discussing revenues and profits, and then the link between revenues, profits from here. And that then might involve a little bit more maths, and so it's another application. And again, that could be in your multiple choice paper 1. And it shouldn't be, again, they're not designed to be overly challenging as such, but it is one more thing to have to remember and one more thing to have to work out how to do. Because remember, your multiple choice is about definitions and applications. That's essentially what they are. There isn't any evaluation. There's no written expression necessarily needed. Sometimes the language that they use or the examples that they give you might be a bit old-fashioned, and that can throw some students. Or it might just be something that you'd never thought of before. One other year was about renewable energy, right? And the idea was about market failures. It was about renewable energy and solar panels. And I had a group of learners who'd never actually thought about solar panels, and it completely threw them. So, what? Solar panel, what? How does that work? So that was a bit different, yeah? It could be that it relates to a specific business that's talked about, a case study. You might then get to discuss something in a paper 2, but I don't think that you don't normally get to this sort of level in a paper 2. Right? The general understanding, yeah, they can expect you to have that as a general understanding. So along the lines of why, you know, when the output is increasing, why is the variable costs also increasing? That sort of idea, explain that, or explain the difference between fixed costs and variable costs with an example. That's a paper 2 style question. So although it's not as mathematical, right, as it would be potentially in a paper 1, where you're having, you have to do the calculation and the answer will be there because it's multiple choice, it still has that understanding. So it's still more of an application. Yes. Are there any questions about that so far?
Nope.
Nope. Excellent. So you guys are all rock stars. Easy. Well done. Now I'm going to take this off the board so that we can jump into Nearpod. That was very good work. Well done, team. They need to invent self-cleaning whiteboards. That's what I've decided. So if you guys are inventors, maybe self-cleaning whiteboards. That would be something that we invent. A little less dark. Now, if we jump into the Nearpod, now I've posted into Classroom the link to the Nearpod. So you should be able to find it. It will be appearing here very soon. Oh, it won't be because I haven't turned it on. Now I have turned it on, so it'll take a couple of seconds to warm up. The code is 7R256. 7R256. Right? Or as, they tend to learn letters in phonetically, so it will be 7R. 7R. 256. Kind of sounds like a motorbike. 256. Right, so that's on now. So let's try it again. Right, so the code comes up. Here we go. Right, so now where we last left off, right, we were talking about what they look like as curves, okay? And you were asked to illustrate the average fixed cost curve as a graph. Now, a number of you worked out how to do that. You would be starting relatively high, okay, dependent on where the average fixed costs start, and then it will decrease and decrease and get smaller and smaller and smaller, just like Yasin has done, and get closer and closer and closer to the quantity axis. Okay. That's what the average fixed cost curve will look like. Now, there is a mathematical term for that, something, a rectangular hyperbola, some sort of expression like that. There is another mathematical term that they use. Oh, Yasin's here. How are you, Yasin? No, he's left again. Okay. There is another mathematical term to describe this idea of approaching the zero and never quite hitting it. And I think, right, strolling back to my maths memory, that's called an asymptote. But don't quote me on that. Right, the idea it gets closer and closer and closer and never, press the wrong button. How are you, Yasin? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good, sorry.
No worries. Good to see you. I thought you weren't here for a bit, so I'll just mark you present so that we don't run into problems of who's here and who's not here. All right. So that's illustrating the average fixed costs as a graph. Now, a number of you also illustrated average variable costs and average total costs as well. Okay, excellent, fantastic, right, that you're doing that, right, but just make sure that you're also paying attention to what the question is asking, right, otherwise you might end up spending too long answering a question and therefore running out of time for subsequent questions, but also the idea that you're actually specifically focused on one particular part, in this case, one particular question, and not a whole range of other things that might distract you. Yeah? Well done, team. Now, here it is. Now we're going to be talking about profit maximization, which, yes, does remind me of the Transformers. Excellent. It's a robot, did you see? Robotic. All right, maximization of profits. If the business is competitive. So this idea of maximizing profits, okay, we're going to make an assumption that that's their goal, that's their objective, all right? And I know it's not the goal and objective of every single business. I'm aware of that, okay? But for this little portion of time, we're going to make an assumption that the businesses that we're talking about, at any rate, at the moment, are all aiming to maximize their profits. They are all profit maximizers, wanting to maximize their profits. However, here's something that we note. If a firm is competitive, and when we say competitive, we're talking perfectly competitive, all right? It actually has no control over the price because it is in fierce competition, if you will, with all of these other businesses out there, and it can't change its price, because if it was to attempt to change its price, then all of a sudden the customers would move to other businesses. So it has no control, is what the theory says. It's all theory, okay? Not talking real life, we're talking theory, right? It has no control over the price. And so the words that we use are no influence over price if it is perfectly competitive, okay? So if it's perfectly competitive, it's going to have no influence over price. Now, here's the thing though. We need to know how is it going to make its profits? So in order to work out its profits, we need to know this thing called revenue, which we've hinted at before because we talked about it when you were building your business case studies. All right, we talked about sales, revenue. Okay, revenue is what you receive, the income you receive from sales. Okay, the turnover that you were looking at with regards to your statistics. So total revenue then is going to be the total turnover or the total amount of revenue earned from all sales for that particular business. And there is a mathematical formula that we need to use. Okay, so we need to work out price multiplied, it's a multiplication this time, multiplied by quantity. When we say quantity, we're talking quantity sold. Now that should be relatively clear for you because you understand this and instinctively you will understand this. In a business, when they sell a product, all right, they might sell one of them, they might sell 10 of them. The amount that they're able to earn is going to be the unit price multiplied by the quantity that they're able to sell. All right, this is why businesses like Coca-Cola make billions of dollars because they sell a lot of product. Yeah, this is why Apple is able to make a lot of money because although their products are very technological and potentially expensive for a lot of consumers, they do still sell a lot of them, which has enabled Apple to become quite a wealthy company. Right? But what will its average revenue be? So its average revenue is going to be revenue per unit. All right? So if you had total revenue, price times quantity, and you were wanting to work out what the revenue would be per unit, we need to figure out how to do that. So how would you work out average revenue, right? What do you think it is going to be? So I'm going to give you 30 seconds, maybe less, because some of you have already figured this out. Work out how to calculate average revenue. Ready? Go. Oh, 30 seconds isn't very long. Remember total revenue, price times quantity. How did we work out the average of our costs? So how could we work out average revenue? What's average revenue going to be?
Is it going to be revenue divided by quantity?
Yes, it will be. It will be total revenue divided by quantity.
That's just equal to the price.
Rockstar, well done. Absolutely right. It equals the price. So your average revenue is exactly the same as the price per unit, which again, intuitively, that's what you will understand. The total revenue is going to be the price times the quantity sold. So the average amount of revenue, what they're able to earn per unit, is going to be the total amount that they can earn in total divided by the amount that they sell. And that will get them their average revenue, which will equal price. So again, the best place for the examiner to ask you about that might be a little table, some numbers, right? Might be varying prices and quantities. Then they get you to work out the total revenue, right? They might then have the answer there and you have to figure out which one is the right one. Or they might have the total revenue, so prices, quantities, total revenues. They might be asking you to work out the average revenue. And again, because it's multiple choice, have several different answers there and you have to pick the one that's right. Okay, that's a relatively standard way to ask you that particular skill. Okay. Now, looking at that, have a think about the implication as to what that might look like as a graph. Okay. So, that. Right, so at some point we might be talking about how to get your optimus level of profit, optimus profit, maximum. No. Right. So if we have a giraffe and we have price here, quantity here, and we're talking total revenue, yeah, it's going to be price times quantity. So total revenue is going to start somewhere here. It doesn't start down here. And then where is it going to go?
It's going to go up.
It's going to go up. Yeah.
Wait, is this a straight line?
Just like that. Now we're going to think potentially about other things as well, right? And one of those things, I mean, it's like 5 steps further, but if we were to think about costs and we were to include total costs, look at that, right? Could be something along those sort of lines, but that's a couple of steps ahead, so don't panic. Right. Now, your average revenue. Average revenue. What's that going to look like? So that essentially that's the price there, isn't it? Because it has to start there. Yeah? So average revenue is then going to be what? What's it going to look like graphically?
Would it just be constant?
Yes.
Like a straight line?
It will be constant. It will be, well done, Darwich. It'll be constant. It'll be a straight line. Any other descriptors?
Horizontal?
Horizontal straight line. Fantastic. At the price level. That's supposed to be horizontal. Like that. Again, this is the model that we're using. And the model we've said was perfectly competitive. I'm not saying every business will have this, by no means. But consider some businesses. Let's have a think about some businesses. If you were in a market stall and you were selling fresh fruits and vegetables, or you might just be selling fresh fruit. It might be like an apple market. And there's like stall upon stall upon stall upon stall, all selling apples. Yeah? You've got no control over the price at that point. Because whatever the price of apples is whatever the price of apples are, right? According to the market, right? Because you're all selling the same product. You're all very competitive. Okay? So therefore, you're all facing that price. It doesn't matter what quantity you sell, you can't change the price. But you're able to potentially sell a lot of quantities at that price, therefore giving you your total revenue. So the only thing, therefore, to consider is how expensive is it for you to set up as a business and operate, and then compare your costs with your revenues, and that will then enable you to potentially find out your profits. Why do we want our profits to be maximized? Surely it's just enough to just make profit, isn't it?
Because we want to get as much money out of what we have already.
Gosh, Darwish is good at this. Well done. Yes. Yeah. It used to be when I did this in class, I got them to write out, you know, how much profit would you like to make from a business? And they would come up, oh, I'd like to make $10. I'd say, well, why $10? Because that sounds like a good number. Yeah, so it's the idea that you want to make the most you possibly can. So the maximizing is about making the most profit you can. It might be that the most profit you can make is $10. But if that's the best you can do, then that's what you can do. It might be the best you can do is $1 million, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, a billion. Yeah, it's just about making the most that you can possibly do, and that's your goal, your objective, to make the most profit you possibly can. With the point being, therefore, that if you're not making the most profit you can, then something needs to change. You need to address any particular problems that are occurring. Right? Yeah. Now, right, okay. Let's move on. Right, if a business has no control over its prices, the prices will then be set or fixed by the market. So what do their prices look like? Hint, we've already drawn it. What implication would this have for total revenue? Go. Have a think. Have a write. See what you come up with. You're in there a couple of times, Charles.
Wait, Mr. David,
Yeah.
I don't understand the second question.
Yeah. The second question's quite difficult.
What does it mean?
Well, depending on what you're answering for the first question, right? The idea is that your average revenue is going to have an impact on your total revenue. Or if you like, your average revenue is determined by your total revenue. So therefore, there's an implication as to what's happening with regards to your total revenue based on your average revenue. And the hint is that we drew it. If you can get to the point where you can write what's happening to the prices, I'm happy. If you can go beyond that to have a thought about what the implications might be for total revenue, excellent, but that is more extra for experts. But what is happening to the prices if they have no control over them? What does it look like? Here we go. Yeah, you've got some good ideas. Okay. All right. So let's have a look at the question. If they have no control over the prices, so the business is completely unable to change the price, it just can't do it, right? They are what is termed a price taker. They have to accept the price that the market sets. So as we saw when we did our diagramming before, what that actually looks like is, if the price is here, that. A perfectly elastic curve about price, which is the equivalent to, because price is also equal to average revenue. So for these businesses, that's what their average revenue looks like. Yeah, perfectly elastic at the price. They can't change it. Yeah, if they were to attempt to change their price, they would immediately lose all their customers. Now, it's theory. Okay, I know that there's going to be real life examples that you can throw at me, and please don't, because that hurts. Throwing the whole business at me, right? You're gonna throw some real life examples at me where this doesn't work, and I'm perfectly happy to say that. But this theory that we are working on is going to be like a touch point. It's going to be an extreme theory that we're then going to be able to use to compare all of the other businesses that we look at. Right? There was a clue in the title that we talked about before about this being perfect competition. Right? Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about your significant others, and you're thinking, gosh, they're perfect, right? Or you possibly are thinking about yourself, thinking, oh, I'm perfect, right? I don't know. But the reality is because we're using the phrase perfect competition, yeah, there's none. Real life does not have perfect competition. It's not there, okay? There are going to be businesses that get close, all right? So those businesses, like I mentioned, the market stall that's selling only apples, that's going to get pretty close. Some of the online businesses that you can think of, they might get close to, dependent on what they're selling and how they're selling it and all those sorts of things, yeah? But there isn't in real life anything that's perfectly competitive. So what we're doing is we're creating a measuring tool, right? We're saying how close do you get to this extreme level of competition? And the idea being is that is eventually going to be our target. That's what we're going to want businesses to be. We're going to want them to be perfectly competitive. Because for us, consumers, we're quite happy with that. Gives us quite a nice price, and we don't have to worry about the price going up and down. Yeah, because it can't. Yeah, at least in the short term. Yeah. So that's the point. The point is going to be that this is a model that we're then going to use to measure reality. We're going to have a look at all the businesses that are out there, and we can compare them to the model. We can say how close do they get to this model. And if they're a long, long way away from it, then maybe we need the government to get involved to move them towards this model. Maybe we can figure out why they're not at this model and make rules and regulations to put them there. That's where this is all going, right? Now, I don't imagine that any of the businesses that you have used as your case studies are going to be classified as perfect competitors. But, they might come close. So, as said before, profit maximization, that's what we're going to assume is the goal of the firm, the objective. That's what they want. But we do know that there are other goals. Okay, so for example, they might simply be wanting to maximize their sales revenue. Okay, they might just be wanting to sell as many products as they can. Right? They might, there's go, maximizing profits. Okay, they might have down here some form of environmental concern. It might be that the business is, you know, worried about the environment and therefore recycling and other things. Yeah. It might be that they consider that they have a social responsibility. So, for example, let's employ the most number of people we can, or let's pay people as much as we possibly can so that they've got a decent living income. Yeah. So it could be that there are different objectives for a business. The one we tend to focus on in economics is this idea of maximizing profits, right? Because it gives us something theoretically to base all of our analysis on. Right? Now, quite often that's tied to the performance pay of managers, right? It's about shareholders, it's about the dividends that they can get. All of that is kind of all linked in with profit or sales maximization. But there are others. Now in New Zealand, we used to, for a while, talk about something called a three-legged dog or a three-legged stool, a chair with three legs, right? Because a lot of businesses said that maximizing profit is only one of their goals. They also have an environmental concern and they also have a social responsibility concern, and that then is the three legs of the stool that the business sits on. The chair the business sits on. So that's more like real life. Yeah? But again, in theory, we're going to say they've got one of these particular goals. But the examiner can ask you, what other goals might a business have? Well, they might have environmental concerns. They might be worried about the environment. They might be thinking that they want to, in their business, develop environmentally friendly packaging for other businesses. They might be creating products that monitor pollution levels. They might be something along those sort of lines. Or it might be that the business has a social responsibility. So it's got an objective of, as said, employing the most number of people it possibly can. Right. Get rid of those. Now, it's your turn. Work out, filling in the gaps about those different objectives of the business. There you go. I've got about 30 more seconds. All right, so hopefully we've gotten through those. Now, the answers should look something like this. The different objectives the business can have: sales revenue, or if you like, revenue maximization, to make as much revenue as possible, i.e. expanding sales, sometimes linked to performance pay for managers. Maximizing profits, i.e. earning the most profits possible, and that will happen when the gap between your revenue and your costs is the biggest it can be. Hold on. Now here's a wee table for you to apply your skills on, right? So those revenues that we worked out before, now you can do it. There's your total amount of revenue, there's quantity sold, and all the table is asking you to do is to put on this one, the average amount. So just where you are with your book, with your notes, put in a table and fill in the table. There you go. Yeah, a couple of seconds to do this one. Won't take you long. Remembering that your average revenue is going to be your total revenue divided by your quantity. Total revenue, of course, is price times quantity. Average revenue, therefore, is also equal to your price. So if we have a look here, 10 divided by 1, 10. Average revenue. Price is all in dollars. $18 divided by 2. That's 9. 4 divided by 3. What's 24 divided by 3?
8.
28 divided by 4.
7.
Possibly see the pattern. 30 divided by 5.
6.
Oh, here we go. Slight change. 30 divided by 6 this time.
5.
Then you've got 28 divided by 7.
That's 4.
10, 9, 7, 6, 5, 4. Yep. And as said, that would then be all of the prices, the average revenue, the price of the businesses. But this is different. Did you notice? What's different about these prices to the ones that we were just talking about? What's different about these prices from the perfectly competitive firm that we talked about before?
They change.
They do change. Specifically, how do they change?
They decrease.
They're decreasing as output increases. Yeah, they're decreasing. So therefore, this is different to perfect competition. Now, I don't know about you, but you've probably worked this out already, that if you say one thing is perfect and this isn't perfect, then this is going to be called imperfect, and not perfect. All right? So this form of competition isn't perfect. So a government could look at this and go, well, maybe we need to make it more perfect. Maybe we need to change something so that it becomes more perfect. Maybe there's not enough competition. That will then force all the prices to be the same. Maybe. All right? Or maybe the business itself needs to be told you have to price at this level. Some governments do that. They say that you have to price at this price. Maybe the government looks at this business and says, they're never going to be perfect. They're always going to try and charge different prices. So I tell you what we're going to do. We'll take the business over and run it ourselves as a government, and we will set the price. Therefore, it will be fair for the consumer. Maybe. Yeah. Lots of different possible scenarios they could do this. Right? The government could say there's not enough competition, so what we will do is we will subsidize other businesses to join this market to be a competing firm against these guys. Do that. So lots of different ideas. But maybe this is okay. This is more realistic. This is more what we know. Right? Because your average revenue here is actually decreasing, as you see. And that's more what we know. Right? So if we were to plot this, then you could actually plot it with the price against the quantity, and you would see that this looks rather familiar. Right? In fact, it's going to look like our demand schedule, which is quite freaky when you think about it. But if you put a slightly different hat on and you think to yourself, well, where does this average revenue come from? It comes from people purchasing quantities of these goods. So the average revenue, therefore, is also going to equal the demand. Because that's where the average revenue comes from. It comes from people buying the goods. And again, because these prices, as we see, they're declining, that makes sense to us because we're very familiar with that idea. That is the law of demand. That means the demand is downward sloping. So we're quite familiar with that. Okay? Now that's a little bit more advanced than you need. Okay? And when you get to IB economics, 2 years' time, not long now, in fact, less than 2 years' time, a year and a half away, okay, when you get to IB economics, this idea you will expand on, right? You will model and you will explain. Right? A little bit more detail. But you'll be fine by then. You'll be fine. Okay? So your average revenue is going to equal your demand. And as we see here, this is looking remarkably like a demand schedule. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do is, yes, we're going to finish there for the day. All right, you've had a lot thrown at you, right? A lot of maths. I would like you to review the maths before our next lesson. All right, we're going to get quite into the structure of different businesses. We're going to talk about how they maximize profits. We're going to look at that, right? We're going to look at different types of businesses and how they figure these sorts of things out, and what happens when they grow, become bigger, what advantages are there to them growing and becoming bigger, what advantages might there to them being smaller, all of those sorts of things, and how do they do all of that. That's still to come, right? All of that. Now, what I would like you to do is review all of this idea, review all of the concepts about your business economics, have another look at your case studies, make sure you're up to date with those with regards to your real life business, but do have a mental break between now and your next lesson. Stay away from the screen, maybe go for a run around the house. Don't scare mum and dad, right? Do something physical perhaps, so that you're not just staring at a screen for the entire day. Yeah. Otherwise, as we say in the land of my birth, which means goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Right,
Mr.
thank you, Mr.
David.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Mr. David.
Thank you. Bye.